Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Bore da pawb. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jess Hooper, Programme Manager for Marine Energy Wales. Welcome to the first of 3 sessions on the Green Stage today, brought to you by Marine Energy Wales, the industry body representing the tidal stream, tidal range, wave and floating offshore wind industries here in Wales. To start off, we'll be giving you an overview and introduction to sector activity in Wales during this session. At 13:30, that's very European of me, we'll have our technology showcase, which is not to be missed, taking a closer look at the innovative energy devices being built and deployed in Wales. And then at 3 p.m, we'll be turning our attention to supply chain innovation and some of the other technological developments being utilised to advance marine energy here in Wales. Before delving into the subject matter of this session, we'd like to first introduce my fellow panel speakers who are joining us. So we have Sarah Livett from Morelights, Tim James from the Port of Milford Haven, Chris Williams from DP Energy, and Henry Dixon from the Tidal Range Alliance. Just a quick one, if you have any questions to submit in the course of the presentations, please do put them into the chat bar on the side of your screens, and we will come back to those towards the end of the session in a question and answer session. And from there, we'll go across to my presentation, hopefully. There we go. And ready. So firstly, a quick intro to us. Marine Energy Wales is the industry-led stakeholder group representing the wave, tidal and floating offshore wind industries in Wales, as I said earlier. We bring together technology developers, test centres, sectoral alliances, the supply chain, academia and the public sector to establish Wales as a global leader in sustainable emerging offshore renewable generation. Our vision is to create a thriving and diverse emerging offshore renewables industry here in Wales that can make a significant contribution to a low carbon economy. We currently have a 60+ strong membership, all working together to advance this sector. Membership details can be found on our website, detailed on the slides at the bottom there. As a strategic gateway into the sector network, we are uniquely placed to promote Welsh capability, champion the Welsh opportunity, and encourage strategic relationships. And that's why we're here today. So what do we mean by emerging offshore renewable energy? We have a diverse audience here today, so I thought it was worth giving a quick intro to how we can harness the power of our oceans. You're probably already familiar with renewable energy sources such as wind and solar, and perhaps hydro. However, did you also know that in the UK, we're leading the world in understanding how we can use the ocean's natural rhythms to produce clean, sustainable electricity from marine renewables, which then enable us to take action on climate change and reduce our carbon emissions. So how do we produce this clean, green electricity? A number of methods and technologies exist to harness the power of the sea, which I'll run through very quickly now. So firstly, we have tidal current or tidal stream, where kinetic energy from the movement of water with the ebb and flow of the tide is forced around islands and headlands and therefore accelerates, creating a predictable energy source twice a day, which is used to drive submerged turbines, which might be fixed beneath structures floating at the surface or could be attached to the seabed or even fly as underwater kites. We also have tidal range, which is the increase in height of the ocean caused by the ebb and flow of the tide. We can capture this change in height using lagoons or barrages, which have turbines installed in their walls. Then there's wave. Waves act like a store of wind energy. As the wind passes over the sea, energy is transferred from the air to the water. Wave energy then arrives at our coastlines later than the wind energy. There are lots of ideas for technologies to capture wave power from floating devices, devices below the surface, or on the seabed. And finally, you might already be familiar with offshore wind, and until very recently, all the wind turbines at sea have been installed on large structures attached to the seabed in relatively shallow water. However, most of Wales has very deep water, and so it would be very expensive to create structures tall enough to sit on the seabed. But with recent progress, engineers have found ways that these turbines can be installed on floating platforms, which means we can look to install these devices in our deep Welsh waters further from shore. So why here? Why Wales? We're incredibly lucky in Wales to have all these resources on our doorstep. as you can see from the map on the right, with purple for tidal stream, orange for wave, and blue or turquoise for wind, with significantly more extending into the Celtic Sea between Wales, Ireland and Cornwall. The UK's practical resource has been independently estimated at 15 gigawatts for tidal stream, 23 gigawatts for wave energy. And for floating wind, there could be in excess of 50 gigawatts of electricity capacity available in the Celtic Sea across both Irish and UK waters. In order to harness these forms of renewable energy, we also need electrical grid networks to export the power generated, as well as ports to build and transport the devices, which are also indicated on this map with yellow lines and blue ship symbols respectively. And you'll hear from Tim James later today at the Port of Milford Haven. As you can see, Wales has accessible high voltage grid lines adjacent to these resource areas, which make it stand out compared to other areas of the UK and Europe. We can also draw on skills and an experienced workforce from our historic energy industries, nuclear in the north, oil and gas in the south, and their associated supply chain expertise. Additionally, not shown on here and of strategic significance for a hydrogen future, we have noteworthy gas infrastructure connecting the west to the English borders and beyond. We also have strategic connections and alliances that go beyond our borders to Ireland, Scotland, southwest England. On top of these, we have collaborative projects working to unite sectors and regions through strategic alliances such as the Celtic Sea and the Tidal Range Alliance, and you'll hear from Henry about that later today, as well as academic initiatives, which I'll touch more on shortly. There's no question about it, Wales is poised. We have the foundations in capability and capacity and the ambition to deliver. I touched there on our academic strengths here in Wales. Underpinning the sector and providing robust foundations for innovation, we have strategic research and innovation partnerships, test facilities and demonstration sites. These include the Marine Energy Test Area and the Tiger Ramsey Sound site, in combination with the Pembrokeshire Wave Hub and Anglesey Morelights array demonstration zones. And you'll hear a bit more from Sarah about that shortly, but these are basically zones which will enable multiple deployments of the same technology in arrays or farms, a bit like wind farms, but underwater. And these projects, they provide test beds for these innovative technologies to come through. Coupled with the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult's Marine Energy Engineering Centre of Excellence, we refer to that one as MEES because it's a bit of a mouthful, these enable valuable learning across the sector and add to the UK's world-leading test centre network. These represent a key asset to Wales, and our ability to innovate will continue to attract not only the interests of technology developers, but also leverage the investment that's already been made in this infrastructure. In terms of integrated infrastructure, as well as our test and demonstration network, we also have 8 strategically located ports and facilities sited along the northwest and south coast, pursuing investment and upgrades. Associated with these, research and development trials are currently underway to assess the potential opportunity that hydrogen production, storage and handling may also represent to Wales. There's significant storage and pipeline capacity at a number of Welsh ports, which could represent a solution for alternative use of emerging offshore energy power to be used to produce green hydrogen instead of being exported to grid. All this, as well as academic research initiatives, aligning university activity with industry needs, such as Celtic and Sea camps, projects bringing expert academic and world-class research facilities at Swansea, Bangor and Cardiff universities, together forming a national centre of excellence for marine technology and enabling those cross-industry linkages and economies of scope cross-sector. So why marine energy, and what does it represent for Wales? This significant and diverse marine resource enables us to host all these technologies, making Wales the best place to do emerging offshore renewables, and could position us as the leading offshore renewable energy generator in the UK. You'll note clustering in the map on the right in the coastal regions in the north and southwest, companies grouping where infrastructure and supply chain synergies complement the Welsh resources available, which then act as anchors or magnets, driving diversification, innovation and economic opportunity. The image on the right here illustrates 20 technology and project developer interests, both homegrown and attracted to Wales for our resource and capability. I'll explore these a little more shortly. So in the emerging offshore renewable energy sector, there are a range of benefits available to Wales. Brings skilled jobs and opportunities. We're expecting in excess of 20,000 jobs by 2040 and 50 to 60% of the economic benefits being felt in our coastal communities. As part of our green recovery, Marine Renewables bring diversification opportunities, particularly, as I say, away from those existing energy infrastructures such as nuclear and oil and gas. It also offers an untapped solution to climate change, contributing to our net zero targets, and contributes to a diverse, secure, predictable, and resilient energy mix. It's so crucial to have a mix of energy for when there's no sun or wind. Through being produced on our shores, this helps with our future energy security. Marine energy could also become a national export, with an export market worth an estimated £76 billion by 2050. Just quickly to run through some of our developers. The images on the right illustrate the diversity of the technologies with activities here in Wales, from low-flow tidal kites to tidal stream turbines, floating wind turbines, and devices capable of harnessing the power of our waves. Some examples of which, so to the north, we have North Wales Tidal Energy, and Henry will talk a bit more about that later, a development company looking at a tidal lagoon, which could not only bring multi-generational energy security, but could also act as a coastal flood defence in these times of rising sea levels. The 240 megawatt Morelights Tidal Stream demonstration zone, with 10 technology developers lined up for deployment in their test berths, where the appeal of a pre-consented site with grid connection is unrivaled, as Sarah will explore a bit later. Then we have Monesto, a Swedish company, and they're the ones developing the low-flow tidal kite that I mentioned, and the image is shown in the centre there. Then Nova Innovation, a tidal stream technology developer, developing a blue energy island project at Bardsey Sound, aiming to eliminate diesel generators from Bardsey Island. And then to the south, Bombora Wave Power, an Australian wave energy company now headquartered in Pembrokeshire, destined to deploy later this year off the Pembrokeshire coast. Then there's Blue Gem Wind, developing floating offshore wind projects in the Celtic Sea. And finally, Marine Power Systems, founded by Swansea alumni and developing flexible ocean energy technology that can be configured to deliver wave power, floating wind power, or a combination of both. As you can see, we have a diverse range of technologies and projects, all representing opportunity for innovation, diversification, collaboration, and above all, decarbonisation. Now I'll hand you over, I think, to Tim first off, to explore the potential of Milford Haven Port. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Jess. No great introduction. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Tim James. I'm the head of commercial and energy at the Port of Milford Haven, which you can see here. I'm going to kind of give you a whirlwind tour of the current activity on the waterway, the opportunity, and there'll be a little bit of repetition with what Jess has done, but it'll hopefully complement it. What we're doing currently, and then both in terms of sort of how we're adapting our service offering to accommodate those technology developers that Jess just shared you, and then also some of the other innovation projects that we're doing as we look to prepare for the transition towards net zero and ultimately hit it in advance of the government targets. So not sure how many of you know the waterway, but it's it's the UK's largest energy port. The Port of Milford Haven's been here since about the 1950s with a kind of mandate around safe navigation and protecting the environment in the waterway. And I won't go through each of these individually, but you can see there's some big, significant global multinationals, primarily focused on oil and gas, and we are working with them to not only enable them to sustain their operations as we transition to net zero, but also welcome the opportunity that comes from having all of that resource off our coast and the interest in the marine renewable energy sector. Why is the waterway? Why we got this energy capital in the waterway? It's primarily because of its natural geography, which you can see here. We've got no air draft, so tall structures can access the land. We've got a wide channel, so big ships can go in and out. Good depth of water, and why is the Milford Haven Waterway an excellent location to embrace these kind of new technology developers and this new industry? It's primarily because we've got a supply chain that's cut its teeth on the oil and gas sector, which is highly transferable. There's proximity to the energy source, which Jess showed you, which I'll kind of reinforce in a second. The interconnectivity with the rest of the UK, and there's a really strong kind of political and stakeholder support to really kind of embrace these types of industry. Looking a bit kind of more spatially and at this, the interconnectivity, Jess picked it up, but you can see here sort of how the Milford Waterway is connected to the rest of Wales and the UK. There are mainline railways, there are railheads, gas transmission connection, electric transmission connection. There's also product pipelines for bulk liquids that go up to Manchester. And there are future developments as well that we're aware of. There's a high voltage DC interconnector that will connect the Milford Waterway with the Republic of Ireland, which is progressing, and obviously the floating wind activity, which I'll come to in a minute, as well as the wave energy stuff as well. So our role, primarily in carrying out our function, is around safety on the water, but we've also got this economic development function as well, because what we want to do is obviously make sure the waterway continues to be relevant to all those industries, and we do that really by supporting industry through the provision of port services and infrastructure. Some of the activities that we've done over the years are shown here. Got working on oil and gas columns and new builds. We do quite a lot of testing of training of pilots and marine operations activity through the use of a navigation suite simulator. We've got a twice daily ferry to Ireland, and we handle loose cargoes as well. And what's really important when you think about kind of what a new industry needs, it's not just about the provision of the facility. You need to kind of think a little bit more about what, rather than what you want to give them, what the industry needs. And that's really been the kind of the ethos behind the Pembroke Marine project, which is a collaboration between 4 independent entities kind of coming together to offer a different service to that industry, all with a view to helping them focus their attention on developing their technology and productivity, and driving the cost of that energy down to a level where it's ultimately the ideal is that it gets down to cost parity with grid, and to do that you need you need more than just infrastructure and services. You need innovation, and you need support, and that's what Pembroke Marine's around. It's around sort of putting our hands around the industry and creating services spaces and innovation support. So it's made up of 4 partners. You've got the Marine Energy Engineering and Centre of Excellence, which is the offshore renewable energy catapult element, and they're really there just to support kind of innovation and support supply chain and the technology developers to solve industry-wide problems for the benefit of multiple users. Ourselves, we're delivering a port infrastructure development, which is basically creating more open space for those developers. You've seen the size of them, or you will do very soon. Early stage testing areas and marine energy testing areas, and then sort of later pre-commercial array scale testing off the coast of Pembrokeshire. So those are the 4 elements. I won't go into any more detail because we just don't have the time today, but if you want to know more, just go to mhpa.co.uk and look at Pembroke Port developments, and there's some really good visuals in there. Alternatively, the Marine Energy Wales website has got some good stuff as well. So the opportunity, Jess showed the resource map, showing the wave, which is shown in red here, the wave resource, and then the wave energy resource in orange, and also the offshore wind resource and the Celtic approaches. Just putting that in the context of the other activity in and around the waterway. You've got significant interest in fixed bottom offshore wind off the Irish coast. So all of that activity is kind of coming together to really kind of drive a lot of interest in these industries, and it's all because out there you've got high wind resource, high wave resource, which is greater than what we get on the east coast. A couple of the big players, I'm just going to rattle through these because time's limited, and Jess already mentioned, but you can see sort of floating wind turbines, a nice visual there of Windfloat 2 in Scotland. So Blue Gem Wind are looking at a couple of projects off the coast. One's 96, one's 280 megawatts. And then Marine Power Systems, again, Jess mentioned, but just to give their portfolio a bit of context, you can see they're primarily kind of a wave energy generation technology design, foundation technology designer. And then they diversified their own technology to be a wave and wind and a wind only designer. And then Bombora, again, headquartered in Pembroke Dock. They're building a prototype currently, and effectively this these membranes here, basically the rubber moves as the wave rolls over them and generates kind of an air current working through the system that drives the turbine. And so that's coming together in Pembroke Dock at the moment. And here's one of those yellow modules arriving at Mainstay Marine Solutions building here, who are primarily a shipbuilder. You can see they're kind of servicing some of the offshore wind turbine vessels here, but they're diversifying their business into marine renewables, which gives them a bit of resilience, and it's great for a number of reasons. So that's kind of Pembroke Dock Marine and the marine energy sector, but the other thing is that we're not just talking about electrons, we're talking about molecules and how we can decarbonize the gas grid as well as the electricity transmission system. Milford Haven is, it brings about 30% of the UK's gas in through its network, and so there's really significant infrastructure we've got in place. We know we can electrolyze, we know we can create hydrogen, we know we can pass it through a fuel cell and generate electric from that. But where the gap is the market mechanisms that will unlock that, and not only just unlock it, it will unlock it at scale. And this is the point of the Milford Haven Energy Kingdom project. It's kind of a market mechanism play rather than a technology play. And what we're looking to do is a number of work. What we will deliver by this time next year is a number of work packages that will inform policymakers around how to unlock commercial scale hydrogen deployment in the UK using the Milford Haven Waterway as a template and the activity that goes on around it. So it's a collaborative project again. All of our projects need to be, just because we can't do everything. And here are a couple of the work packages. There are a couple of small scale demonstrations. We do have a hydrogen vehicle refueler on site now, which is great in Milford Waterfront. And we've got a hydrogen-ready boiler in one of the buildings here as well, which is, it's really exciting to actually start seeing that kind of kit coming on the ground and getting adopted. Moving out towards sort of wider decarbonisation, last slide now is our part in the South Wales Industrial Cluster. So obviously the South Wales corridor stretches from Newport to Milford Haven, and it's one of the biggest industrial emitters in the UK. And so we're working in collaboration with some of the other partners to plan the transition towards net zero, and also what endgame looks like in terms of a net zero operation, because we think there's probably going to be technologies that will come in as that will kind of come in as we move towards net zero, but not necessarily be part of the end solution. So it's not just about sort of thinking what the end is; it's how you get there as well. And that's really the point of the South Wales Industrial Cluster, is to really kind of drive that industrial decarbonisation through the whole South Wales corridor. And our part in that is obviously focusing in on around the Milford Haven Waterway and what our future is going to look like. So yeah, that's a kind of a real brief whistle stop on sort of Port of Milford Haven and what we're doing and what we're proposing to do in relation to sort of supporting low carbon generation from marine renewables and decarbonisation more generally. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. Alternatively, just come find me on LinkedIn, or and I'm happy to answer anything. Thank you. Oh, Jess, you're on mute.
Schoolgirl error. Thank you. I was just saying, I think it's the slides there really demonstrate the magnet nature of PDM, Pembroke Dock Marine, and the way that innovation begets innovation, and it's pulling that cluster together and driving those additional ideas and supply chain into the area. So very interesting. So next up, we're going to go to North Wales and to Sarah Livett from Menter, who will be talking about the Morelights Tidal Energy Project.
Diolch, Jess. Thank you, Jess. So this morning I'm going to be talking to you all about the Morelights Project. So the Morelights Project is a Menter project, and we're based up in Anglesey. We're a not-for-profit company, and over the last 25 years, we've brought over £70 million to Anglesey over a really wide range of projects. So we've worked on repairing the Anglesey coastal path, a local castle. We've helped protect the red squirrel, And we've now got this huge range, this huge portfolio of projects from food, Welsh language, youth theatre, fisheries. It goes on and on. But now we have a couple of renewable energy projects. So we've got our hydrogen hub and Morelights Project. So Morelights started back in about 2014 when we won the lease for an area of seabed off the coast of Anglesey from the Crown Estate. This zone was designated by the Crown Estate because of the strong tidal resource that's found there. There were 3 zones around the UK that were designated, and the Morelights zone is currently the only one being progressed. I think, as Jess touched on earlier, the tidal resource there doesn't appear all around the UK. It's due to the features of the shore and the seabed that create the strong tide. So it's a really unique opportunity that we should use. The other thing that makes Morelights unique is the existing grid connections. So with our history with Wilver Nuclear Power Station and Anglesey Aluminium, we have a really unique opportunity to utilise this zone of strong tidal resource in a rural area and have that existing grid connection. So Menter have this lease until 2059, and with that we have to develop the zone, get planning consent to put turbines into the water, and also get the consent to put the infrastructure on land so that we can enable those turbines to connect up to the grid. The zone is about 35 square kilometres, which in layman terms is about the same as 6,000 football pitches, just to give you an idea. And as you can see from the scale on the map, it's about 5 kilometres across at the bottom. So we're going to leave an inshore navigation channel, and that means that the closest turbines will be at least 1 kilometre offshore. And I've just got a map to show you where the zone is off the west coast of Anglesey there. So I think, Jess touched on this earlier as well, but what is tidal stream energy? The tide is governed by the gravitational force of the moon, and that is why the tide is so predictable. We know when it's going to come in and out twice a day. And this means that tidal stream energy is dependable and predictable and differs from the wind and the solar that we are using at the moment. This has also been touched on, but because the industry is still growing and developing, there are a range of different technologies out there. And all 3 of the technologies on the screen will feature in the Morelights zone. So we've got some that will float mid-water, or not float, there'll be a mid-water column. Some surface emergence, so you will see parts of the device above the surface of the water, and then some, as we've seen, that sit on the seabed and you won't see them from the surface. And we've just put some photos up of some of the Morelights developers, just to give you an idea of the actual technology out there that is being developed. And I think there's a few people in some of the pictures to give you an idea of scale of these devices. So as we've said, in the Morelights zone, there'll be an opportunity to deploy arrays. So this means deploying several of the same device, whereas at the moment, most developers go through the testing process and just they just deploy the one. I just wanted to give you a sense of where our developers are from. They're from all over the world. So Morelights has already got international interest. This would be a really big thing for the industry. And what's also important to point out is these developers are all committed to bringing local benefit to Morelights. So we're already talking to the developers about developing our local existing supply chain so that when they come to locate to Anglesey, they can benefit off of what we already have. So why is Morelights important? Well, when it's consented, Morelights would be the largest tidal demonstration zone in the world. We're not a test site, we'd be a demonstration zone where we're giving developers a consented zone and a grid connection. And this means that clearly generating this clean, green, renewable energy would definitely help us reach the net zero 2050 targets. With the continued support of Welsh Government and UK Government, This would be a big step in progressing the marine energy industry, and then specifically at Morelights, the tidal stream energy industry. What's important for Menter throughout this is to bring local benefit. So we do this by creating jobs and creating work. It comes in many forms. So this not only provides a new industry with new skills and careers for young people to develop into, this also provides an industry for skilled workers, those skilled, highly paid jobs, perhaps for people coming from the nuclear background or an oil and gas background, so they can come into a new industry and those skills are not lost. What this also provides an opportunity for us to do is create local jobs to retain young people. It's really important in coastal and rural communities that we are creating enough jobs to retain our young people instead of them all going into the cities to find work. And what this also does for Morelights and Menter is help promote the Welsh language. We do that through our work and retain the Welsh language with retaining those young people back in Anglesey. And finally, how we're doing this is through supply chain. As I've mentioned, we are already talking to our developers. We have regular meetings with them to find out about their requirements for their build phases, for their supply chain, and what they'll need when they come to Morelights and locate in Anglesey. And we're already linking up our local businesses, our local supply chain companies with these developers, getting them in a room and getting them talking about the capabilities that these businesses have now, what the developers need and where those gaps are, and we're working on the gaps over the next couple of years. So give you an idea of the timeline and explain that a bit. So as I said, we were given the lease back in 2014. Since then, we've been working on an environmental impact assessment that we submitted with our applications for a Transport and Works Act order for the on-land infrastructure and a marine licence for the offshore infrastructure. They were submitted back in September 2019, and we're currently awaiting decisions on both of those, hopefully later this summer, fingers crossed. And all being well, we hope to start construction later this year. Provided that goes well, we hope for the first phase of deployment to be going out into the water in 2023. So that's the 2 years where we are now, where we are talking to our developers and our supply chain and getting everything ready for that first phase of deployment. What's also important for me to note here is that Morelights is going to be a phased project. So we work with the regulator. We work on an initial small phase of megawatts. So the maximum capacity of the Morelights zone is 240 megawatts. But to start with, we'll deploy a smaller amount of megawatts with a smaller amount of turbines. And then through our commitments of the EMMP, our Environmental Monitoring and Mitigation Plan, we will show through the monitoring that there haven't been any adverse impacts. We'll talk to the regulator and then hopefully be given another phase for more megawatts, and we'll work our way up to hopefully maximum capacity down the line. But our aim is to have 100 megawatts deployed by 2031. And you can see from our infographic on the right that we also, in that time, hope to create 100 jobs. So that's the aim for Morelights going forward. If you want to find out any more about the project, please go to the website or follow us on Twitter. Fingers crossed, we've got some good news coming our way the next few months. And of course, if you want to get in touch, the email's on screen. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Sarah. We wish Morelights every ounce of luck that we possibly can in that good news to come with the decision-making process coming through. Great presentation, thank you. So now we'll go to Chris Williams at DP Energy, if we can. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Jess. Hello, everybody out there. Yeah, so my name's Chris Williams. I'm the head of development at UK and new markets for DP Energy. So what I'd like to tell you a bit about today is about the opportunity for offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. And I'd like to give you a bit of a background, first of all, into DP Energy as a company. Look at what's happened in offshore wind over the last 20 years in the UK. and then how we're going to move into deep water, discussing the sort of challenges, the opportunities, some of the technology solutions that are out there, and then the Celtic Sea opportunity with regard to local regeneration, and then talk about some future technology steps that the companies are taking in and around the waterway. So first of all, DP Energy. Well, DP Energy is an independent renewable energy development company. We've been around for 30 years, developing mainly onshore wind in Ireland. It's headquartered just north of Cork. And in that period, the company has consented 1 gigawatt of renewable energy projects. And 400 megawatts of those have been constructed and are already operational, mainly around Ireland, but also further afield. The company at the moment has a 4 gigawatt portfolio of projects, which are all under development. It includes...
Chris, sorry to interrupt you. We've got your notes screen up rather than the full screen. Thank you.
Sorry, I can't see the screen myself. So I don't know how far I got there. So there's a 4 gigawatt portfolio looking at the moment, and that's principally Tidal Stream in Canada, in Nova Scotia, and some substantial projects, onshore wind and solar in Australia, Canada, and Ireland. So more recently, DP Energy has moved into floating offshore wind, concentrating in the UK, Ireland, and also new markets further afield. The current portfolio consists of 3 projects in Ireland, fixed and floating, and these include projects, each of which is around 1 gigawatt of capacity, being carried out in development with Iberdrola. The company at the moment has opened offices in the Pier House, Marine Energy Wales' hub in Pembroke Dock, and we're currently recruiting for our project in the UK. So looking at offshore wind in the UK as a whole and what's happened over the last 20 years. Well, the first turbines were installed in the North Sea 20 years ago. And within that 20 years, we're now producing 10% of the UK's electricity through offshore wind. That's over 10 gigawatts of operational projects in Wales and England. And I'm concentrating here on the Crown Estates, England and Welsh seabed. There's far more capacity in the Crown Estate Scotland, but I'm using Crown Estate as my database. And that has caused a massive cost reduction in the cost of energy. So in the last 6 years, costs have fallen by around 65%. And that's principally due to the continual technology and supply chain innovation and development that's happened, not just through the wind turbines themselves, but through the supply chain, the construction vessels, and all sorts of other types of associated supplies that go with it. So technology advancements have been enormous, as you can imagine. The image here shows in 2019, a typical wind turbine was 6 megawatts with a 150-meter rotor diameter. Going back to 2020, round one offshore wind in the UK, I was a project manager for the Scar with the Sands offshore wind farm in Swansea Bay. At that time, a nominal wind turbine would be about 2 or 3 megawatts. But looking forward 15 years, we're looking at 15, 17, even 20 megawatt wind turbines with rotor diameters of around 250 megawatts. So in the future, a single turbine would be able to provide 5, if not 10 times the amount of power as a project when we first started this industry only 20 years ago. The image shows the scattering of projects at the moment. These are leases that are either operational or going through development. And they're principally in shallow water, fixed offshore wind in the north coast of North Wales, off the eastern coast of England and off the south coast of England. And there's one little blob there that's been mentioned before off the coast of Wales, and that's the Erebus site, a 96 megawatt project being developed by Blue Gem Wind, which is currently going through the development process. So as we move into deeper water, and I'm talking about water depths which are probably in excess of 60 meters, we enter a whole new questions of problems with regard to how we construct them, how we operate the wind turbines. We're not able to use traditional construction methods of jacket barges and turbine installation vessels, and we end up in a situation where we've got floating structures. Floating structures lead to instability, and that's a massive problem for the wind turbines themselves. So the performance of the wind turbine is key to make sure that the project finance and the guarantees and the warranties provided by the wind turbine supplier is able to deliver the amount of megawatts that is commissioned on day one. So there's a very large problem with regard to making sure that the stability of the platform is adequate for the wind turbine, but also meeting other requirements such as the dynamic cables that are required, and also making sure that we're able to install the turbines using technologies that are available or will be available in the future. So moving further offshore into deeper water, we have larger waves, we have tides to consider, we have greater winds, we're further offshore, so O&M can be a problem. We've got massive structures, so port suitability is a problem. It's good to hear Tim talk earlier about the Port of Milford Haven. And we might have some new environmental impacts as well that we haven't considered before, things like large mooring spreads and also operating vessels around the wind farm. So where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. It's interesting that globally, around 80% of the offshore wind resource is in water depths greater than 60 meters. So this is going to open up a whole new industry globally. As we're not using traditional vessels, we're able to use larger wind turbines with significantly longer blades, significantly heavier nacelles. We're moving into areas which are currently untapped and have a massive resource. So there is grid availability. And at the moment, there's low environmental impacts from other wind farms in the area. We're further offshore, quite likely, so there's lower visual impact. There's higher wind speeds offshore, which means greater energy per turbine. And it's also providing the opportunity to use technology and skills transfer from oil and gas and to bring those skills into the local supply chain and create regeneration around the coastal communities. The image on the left, you can see that the red colors are basically the shallower water, sort of 50 meters or so, which has already been exploited by fixed offshore wind. The green colors around the coast identify areas of water which are effectively greater than 60 meters. And these are the areas that we're looking to exploit in the UK for floating offshore wind. And the Celtic Sea, as you can see, is a great opportunity there on the bottom left-hand side. But globally, the market is expanding massively. Countries that don't have a continental shelf, such as Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, and further afield, there's a real focus at the moment to use offshore wind in these countries that haven't been able to use offshore wind in the past because of the depth of water to help them meet their net zero targets. So new challenges requires new technology. And these are basically broken down into four groups, if you like, where there's a barge floating structure, a semi-submersible structure, a spar buoy, or a tension leg platform. And what we're seeing is that a number of independent development companies have already moved forward. And over the last 10 years, they've actually got some pretty impressive equipment already in the sea. On the left-hand side, we see the Ideal dampening pool barge. This has been installed at 2 and 3 megawatt scale in France and Japan in the last sort of couple of years. A leader in the industry is Principal Power with a semi-submersible platform. Again, multiple installations, a lot of learning going on, and some large projects now being developed, including in Scotland and in Portugal. High wind spar buoy, effectively a column. A very large column, in fact, is about 100 meters below the surface, so maybe not suitable for our supply chain and our sites in the UK, particularly in the Celtic Sea. But again, some really strong learning being carried out there in Norway and in Scotland, where turbines are operating very efficiently and effectively at this moment in time. And then there's a tension leg platform. A company called SBM Offshore, also Marine Power Systems, are looking at a very similar device. And the benefit of the tension leg platform is that the platform is held stable through tension members, acting in tension, stuck to the seabed, and this is providing significantly higher levels of stability for the turbine to operate efficiently during its lifetime. I think what's worth noting here is that these structures are very large. If it's reinforced concrete, it could be 15,000 tons per platform for a 15 megawatt turbine. If it's steel, it could be 3,000 or 4,000 tons of steel. So the barge and the semi-submersible and the spar buoy could maybe be manufactured by using reinforced concrete and or steel. The tension leg platform is more likely to be a steel construction, and I mentioned that at the moment for a slide coming up in a minute. So moving to the Celtic Sea, as I showed before, there's a massive area that can be developed due to just purely the depth of water. And there's been a lot of work carried out by numerous companies, including ourselves. And there's a report carried out by the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult. And this identified 5 zones where there's areas potentially available for the development of projects going forward. And these zones add up to something like 25,000 square kilometers of seabed and capable of delivering tens of gigawatts of projects. So the Crown Estate, the Welsh Government, BEIS and other parties are all looking to these areas to try to focus on creating renewable energy, creating industry, creating a marketplace. And in March this year, the Crown Estate announced that it is hoping to let areas of the seabed for projects up to 300 megawatts. And that's 3 times larger than the existing Erebus project that is currently leased at this moment in time. It's really nice to see that the Crown Estate here are taking a long-term view on it, looking at the future of the overall area, making sure that the sustainability of the area, the environmental acceptability of the area, and the long-term ability of the area to contribute as massively as possible to net zero is being considered as we look forward, and we look forward to seeing that bidding round come forward in the near future. Again, the Celtic Sea, the numbers we've talked about are enormous, and the potential for local regeneration benefits are significant as well. So the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, commissioned by Welsh Government and also the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly, have carried out a generic assessment of the types of work that can be carried out locally to meet the requirements, but also to provide maximum regeneration in the local area. They've taken 4 types of sites. Wave Hub, which is a site off North Cornwall, 32 megawatts of capacity, recently purchased by a company called Hexagon. Hexagon are looking to develop projects there in the next couple of years. The Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone that's already been mentioned, again, another project off the Wales coast this time, 90 megawatts capacity. And then 2 generic projects, a 300 megawatt site developed out in 2027 and 2028, and a 500 megawatt site in 2930. And what we're seeing here, if the structure was made of steel, you could imagine over 100,000 tons of steel would be required to build out a single 300 or 500 megawatt project. If that structure was manufactured of reinforced concrete, a 300 megawatt floating offshore wind farm could require around 300,000 tons of reinforced concrete. And I believe that this can be done in Wales. And what we should be doing is asking ourselves questions: how do we realise this opportunity to maximise the regeneration benefit in Wales? There's probably 40 different technologies looking to develop floating offshore wind at this moment in time around the world. As we move into deeper water, as we move into areas which are more exposed and with higher wave environment, we're looking into areas where we can actually try to combine wind and wave designs in the same locality. So Bombora with Technip FMC with this Inspire project, Marine Power Systems with their technology, floating power plants are all looking at technologies which can add wind and wave onto the same platform. The image here shows a 12 megawatt wind turbine supplemented with 6 megawatts of wave, which provides an 18 megawatt platform, which is a significant generation station. There's also opportunities to infill between the turbines with wave technology. Then looking further afield at offtake, and companies looking at hydrogen offtake, as Tim mentioned before, and the ERM Dolphin project, supported through a Bayes government grant, is effectively looking to do hydrogen generation on a semi-submersible platform. So that's my presentation. As I say before, this is a great opportunity for ourselves, DP Energy, the rest of the industry, the supply chain, to make sure we try to maximize the benefit from this opportunity that is at our doorstep in the Celtic Sea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. That was a really good presentation. Very good detail on some of the aspects of floating offshore wind. And I think, as you say, very important that we look to maximise those benefits to the benefit of Wales. So now I think we're going to go over to Henry Dixon of the Tidal Range Alliance, and we'll hear a little bit more about tidal lagoon potential.
Good morning, all. My name is Henry Dixon. I am the chairman of North Wales Tidal Energy, seeking to build a tidal lagoon along the North Wales coast. But I'm also chairman of the Tidal Range Alliance, a working group of the British Hydro Association, which brings together the whole industry, tidal range industry. So that is lagoons, barrage developers, the supply chain, academia, and other interested people across the UK who are looking really to see why the tidal range hasn't been adopted by the government, how we can promote it, how we can bring the sort of features and benefits to their notice, and get across many of the multifunctional, multi-generational benefits that I'm about to talk about to government to see if we can move the whole agenda forwards. So Jess has already explained the difference between tidal stream and tidal range. To put this into context, tidal range is not a novel, exciting new technology. This is something that's been around for some time. So you can see the mill pond at Carew Castle there, built in something between the 12th and 14th century, where they capture the tide every day in order to drive the mill wheels. Then in the middle, on the top level, you have La Rance in France, which was built in the 60s. On the top right, you've got Shiwa in Korea. And so you've got a number of schemes which exist and have demonstrated the value of tidal range. And then there are many schemes, there are 8 or 9 in the UK alone, being proposed, from the very large on the bottom left there with the 7 barrage to smaller ones such as Swansea, which you see in there. So these are projects which vary enormously in size from something, as I say, something very small, which is generating hundreds of megawatts, to something huge. North Wales Tidal Lagoon, for example, requires a 31-kilometre wall, 96 million tonnes of stone, but would generate nearly enough electricity for every home in Wales. So these are significant power stations. So why would we want a tidal lagoon, a tidal barrage? There are 3 main areas. One, and as I say, has already been alluded to by Jess and Sarah and other people, the reliability, the predictability of marine energy, of energy generation from the sea. The ultra-long operating life, this is a very different thing, which again, tidal lagoons are designed to live for a very long time. And there are a lot of benefits of tidal lagoons which other forms of renewable energy don't come across, don't deliver. So reliability, predictability, well, why does that matter? Thanks to a report which actually came out from Drax and Imperial College only last month, this chart shows a very interesting display of what Britain's wind farm capacity factor was. So there's a rush to wind at the moment, whether that is onshore, offshore, or floating. There's a huge rush to wind, and wind has an enormous amount of value to the UK. But there are periods, as we know, when the wind doesn't blow, and obviously at night the sun isn't shining. Now in March, as you can see at the end of February, beginning of March, there were 11 days when there was a very high pressure system over not just the UK, but Northern Europe, and the wind didn't blow. And so output fell dramatically for a sustained period. Now, that might not matter if it's for a day, but for 11 days, that becomes pretty critical. So we really need to get governments, whether that's in Wales or in Westminster, to plan for periods when the wind isn't going to blow, and we need to think about that. We need to think about that energy mix. We need a bit of everything to make sure we can keep the lights on. And in March, the system coped because we were able to burn fossil fuels. But in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, we won't be able to burn coal. The coal plants won't exist. And again, with net zero, we will not be encouraged to burn gas. in March, there was a deficit of 2,300 gigawatt hours of energy. So many of you people watching and certainly will be aware of the Norwich, a marvelous pumped hydro storage scheme in North Wales. That stores 9 gigawatt hours. So you can see there's a real problem here. And people talk about batteries. Yes, well, that's all right. We'll store energy in batteries. But at the moment, the world's largest battery energy system is in Australia. If we had 10,000 of those, we could cover the shortfall. The trouble is that 10,000 battery storage systems of that size would cover the whole of Liverpool and beyond. So that obviously is not feasible. So we need to find other energy sources. We need to make sure we have an energy mix which covers all these possibilities, because we don't want a situation like Texas where everything froze and then households were without their power. So we really need to make sure we keep the lights on, and we need to plan ahead for that. Building a tidal lagoon, building energy sources takes years. We need to make sure the environment's protected. We need to build it. We need to get it operating. That's a 10-year lag for the big lagoon, 3 to 5 years for small lagoons. So we need to be moving quickly. And people might say, well, we've got new interconnectors coming in from Europe. They're coming from Norway, from France. Yes, that is true. But when some of those people, the weather systems affects them as well. They're also cutting back on other forms of energy, so cutting back on nuclear. So they may not be able to supply that energy through the interconnectors. And really, we need to make sure we have our own energy stability and security ourselves. So the operating life, I talked about that. So wind farms are talking about an operating life of about 30 years. Similar for solar farms. Nuclear energy, talking about an operating life of 40 years. People are talking about extending that to 60 years. But many people will have seen in the news recently that the plants that were built 30, 40 years ago are being taken out of service for safety and operational reasons. They're being scaled back. It takes a long time to build new plants, and there's been delays in that. So we need to start thinking in 25 years' time, in 2050, when net zero, the old target for net zero is 2035 now, all these wind farms are being built. If they have to be decommissioned and rebuilt, wouldn't it be a good idea to have some tidal lagoons, some tidal barrages in place to make sure that there's a baseload supply of electricity happening predictably, reliably, every day, day in, day out? And when we look at the carbon budgets for these, shouldn't we actually look at what's the carbon budget for building offshore wind or for onshore wind or for nuclear or for any other energy source? Because when we build a tidal lagoon, we're looking at a 120-year operating life. We're looking at something, it's Victorian thinking. We're planning for our children and our grandchildren, and that needs to be taken into account. When we do use concrete, when we do use steel, and we make sure we use low carbon versions of both, then that should be taken into account when we look at the whole carbon budget of these programs. And finally, we talk about, certainly when we turn to nuclear, there's certainly talk about decommissioning and the residue that needs to be handled. But equally, all sorts of other renewable energy systems need to be decommissioned. Frankly, I don't think that many tidal range, tidal lagoons or tidal barrages will need to be decommissioned, because with sea level rise as is predicted, they will be increasingly important to protect the coastline. Again, I'll be coming to that more often. So those decommissioning costs, which are often taken into account, really don't apply to a lot of tidal range projects. And just to talk, if I may, briefly for one scheme I know the best, you will see there a map of North Wales showing the predicted flooding from 0.9 to 1.2 meter sea level rise caused by climate change. This obviously would be catastrophic for the area. We need to put in defences. The sort of lagoon we're talking about in North Wales would, and again, there's a picture there which you may not be able to see on your screens, but that actually would mitigate that damage completely. We've had studies done by a very good company called Waterco in Ruthin in North Wales, who advised many of the statutory bodies. There is £3 billion worth of infrastructure and assets at risk. The mainline railway, when it was built, was 400 metres from the sea. It is now about 10 metres. The A55, the link to Ireland, all these things have to be protected. A barrage or a lagoon, such as we propose, would do that. So the storm surge mitigation, the damage, the horrible flooding that people have already had and increasingly having along that coast. And it's the same, frankly, in other areas around the UK where coastal flooding protection is going to be vital. These benefits are something that tidal range, tidal lagoons offer, which are unique to that sort of project. And as already been said, and Jess has said, everybody said, let's bring these projects to the areas that need them. Let's bring these projects into South Wales. Let's bring them into North Wales. There's a very good program, smaller lagoon in Mostyn, which would bring great benefits to Flintshire. The North Wales Tidal Lagoon here, you can see economic impact assessment looks at bringing something like 7 billion into the region for the cost of the project, 22,000 jobs in its own. And if Wilford doesn't go ahead, we can fill the economic and energy gap that was going to come from that nuclear plant. So there's real benefits, transformational benefits for the area. And it's not just the energy, but tourism and amenity within the lagoons, aquaculture, integration with hydrogen, decarbonisation of transport we talked about, use of cheap energy in data centres, all sorts of possibilities. So the reality, sadly, is, however passionate I get about it, is that if we just look at a simplistic, what's the cost of energy, levelized cost of energy, what's the cost per megawatt hour, we can't compete with offshore wind. We can't compete with solar. But should tidal range be assessed purely on a simplistic cost benefit? Only tidal range, and obviously the other marine energies, can help mitigate the problems when we have this Dunkelflaute, the time when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. Only tidal range has this ultra long operating life, which means that in its life, you would have built and taken down 2 nuclear power stations. So going by the cost of Hinkley C, that would be £56 billion for the 2 plants. To build the North Wales Tidal Lagoon is 7 billion. And also, shouldn't we look at whole system value for money? If we are producing regular, reliable energy that's keeping the lights on, that's great. But shouldn't we also look at the coastal protection, look at the jobs, look at all the other benefits? So fortunately, here we are in Wales, and the Welsh Government are currently promoting the Tidal Lagoon Challenge, and they are looking for a Pathfinder Lagoon, a first-of-a-kind lagoon. They're looking at a number of different projects. There are 8 developers and sites under consideration around Wales, from the relatively small to the very large, and they are looking at having a process to help one of those lagoons get into development, get into construction. And as I say, the costs are all being assessed, the timing, the benefits to Wales, the benefits to the UK, and we're all waiting with bated breath, I have to say, to see what happens next, where they're going to go, how they're going to run the competition. But all credit to Wales for doing this, and as I say, something that we've been strongly supported by Marine Energy Wales, and thank you to them too. So this is all about technology and innovation. There's technology and innovation. I've said this is a known technology. Basically, a lagoon is a hydro scheme. We've been building hydro schemes for hundreds of years. It just happens this one is in seawater. But we still need to think, how can we make sure that we do the environmental impact assessment right? How can we use latest technology, drones or LiDAR or whatever else, to make that more effective, more cost effective, more efficient, and get all the right measurements? How do we do the right design development? How do we do hydro modeling to make sure that there aren't any sediment issues, make sure that the lagoons are flush, make sure that the beaches are clean, make sure that if we have things like mussel farms, or if we have floating solar inside, that they don't obstruct any of that. How do we build it the best way? What's the best low carbon route? Do we do it the old Roman way, using fly ash? What else will work in terms of ultra long life technology? The turbines that we need to work both ways, the water coming in and the water going out. Some excellent work have been done by the leaders in this field, whether it's GE or Andritz, whatever, but there are other ideas from companies like Tide Tech about how can we turn the direction of the turbine? How do we make sure we get the best performance? And importantly, how do we make sure that we protect fish and reduce any, say it's very small already, but make sure any fish mortality is minimized completely? And then this reliable energy, predictable energy, which has all sorts of technical value to the grid in terms of its inertia, big turbines, of voltage control. How do we best use that? How do we store the energy? Do we store the energy in batteries? Do we store the energy in another pumped hydro scheme? How do we use the energy for decarbonization of transport? And then let's look at the environment. If you've got a big lagoon like North Wales, actually there is plenty of space there to have a 20-acre marine reserve. We're already going to be protecting the turn sites that were washed away by the storm floods of 2 years ago. So how else can we actually get benefits? How can we really benefit the environment for birds, for animals, for the sea life, and for the humans that live around it? And finally, and the one sadly that's most important for persuading government, how do we bring in this whole life costing? How do we look at a 120-year ultra-long life system, compare it to something that's only going to last 25 years, and make sure that comparison is fair, is apples with apples, not apples with pears? And how do we bring in all those benefits of the coastal protection, the jobs and everything else? So there's lots to do, lots to think about, but I have to say, I think that the tide is turning, sorry for the pun, but the sooner the better. We really need to be moving forward. So thank you for listening, and Jess, back to you.
Thank you very much, Henry. There's a lot of puns available in this sector, I find, and I usually end up using them without intending to. That's great. I think we're probably going to go to a Q&A session now, so hopefully someone backstage will pull all of my fellow panelists on. We've clearly seen a great array of projects and technologies that are underway and being developed in Wales, and clearly, hopefully demonstrated the sheer opportunity that arises from our marine environment. So there are a couple of questions that have come in. I'll probably go to Henry first, because that's probably freshest in everybody's minds. So one question we've got here: can you describe the opportunities for Tidal Range to provide continuous generation, either via combination with storage? And I know you touched on batteries and sort of that sounds quite challenging, but also there's a suggestion about maybe locating generators around the UK to benefit from the different timings in the tidal cycles to then enable continuous generation.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Jess. We've done, some work has been done by Cardiff University on combining a potential tidal lagoon in Somerset with the North Wales lagoon, and then further north with Mersey and maybe Cumbria. And as the tide moves up the west coast, you've got a 4-hour time delay. And the thinking is, when one is coming up and it's generating and then going down, the next one is coming up. So there is a possibility of merging that supply, looking at that supply holistically, and we get a pseudo base load, but it is not, we can't say, right, well, we're generating 2.5 gig at each, that's a continuous 2.5 gig. It doesn't work like that. It actually drops down to about half a gig, 500 megawatts. Still serious numbers when you look at other renewable technologies, but it's not that big continuous supply. But I still think that is going to be useful. And as we look more in the future towards distributed grid, that's the sort of thing I think that could be very helpful. Equally, why not combine with pumped hydro, with pumped storage? I think there's real potential. I think it's an area where you can actually, like to Norway, produce significant amounts of energy for a reasonable time period. If, and again, I know North Wales best, if we were, for example, to use Llandillas Quarry and that stone is used, then that would make an ideal place to actually have a pumped storage facility and to, when the energy is not needed, fill that up and provide that. And again, electrolysis of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a good way of storing energy. It's going to be used in transport, it's going to be used in heating, it's going to be used in industry. So let's look at that. The potential to provide true baseload like a nuclear plant isn't there, but it is between the various lagoons, between the various storage systems, we can provide continuous. And what is important is that there are times of day when we are producing genuinely industrial amounts of power and energy.
It's very interesting to consider, isn't it? I mean, there's such scope there, and I think you can probably draw across the whole sector a sort of picture of the opportunity arising from that reliability and predictability, and the fact, I think I mentioned in my presentation, the fact that waves often, the wave power that we're getting arrives after the wind has gone through. So you've got a staggering that's automatically there. So the system benefit that can come from the marine renewable environment and marine renewable technology in combination becomes very powerful, I think. There's a pun there, inadvertently. So I've also got another question here around co-location. So what opportunities do the panel see for co-location of technologies? So you mentioned there sort of pumped hydro and the tidal lagoons, but I suppose there's also opportunities for floating solar in that environment. And I know Chris touched on floating offshore wind and wave. I suppose, Chris, should I come to you first?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Yeah, I did mention it, and people are looking at it, particularly from the wave energy industry, to trying to get access to market, co-locating and hybrid technology are two different ways to look at it. So you can either have both wave and wind on the same platform, or you can have wind and wave within the same area. And the massive benefit there, very similar to what Henry was talking about, with regard to wind, is highly variable. wave is less variable. It's more persistent and more consistent, and effectively it will take some of the variability out of the average output from a particular location. I think at the moment, from our perspective, I think, floating offshore wind, it's still, we still haven't got very large turbines up and running. There are still a number of unknowns from a technology perspective, and we need to make sure that we're getting those right before we start trying to complicate things. Equally, from a wave technology perspective, I spent quite a bit of time working with Bombora, for example. The technology that is there, but it's not there exactly at this moment in time to go commercial. So there's technology issues that we need to address, but there's also regulatory issues as well. So, with regard to leases of the seabed, with regard to CFDs for hybrid technologies, these are all things that need to be looked at and concentrated in the future to make sure that the opportunities are arised. But most definitely, as we go into floating wind, we are going into areas where there's significant waves, that don't compare to North Wales or the North Sea. We're looking at those 13, 14 metre waves off Pembrokeshire. Off the west coast of Ireland, we're probably looking at 16 metre waves. And there's a great resource, but it's a massive challenge for ourselves just from a platform perspective to get the wind turbine to work. So it's horses for courses and take it step by step.
Yeah, it's a real way up of the sort of cost versus benefits, isn't it? I mean, sharing that infrastructure and bringing those costs down in that way, but then trying to balance the technology requirements and the technology survivability, I suppose, in those sorts of environments becomes paramount. And Henry, for you, I think probably tidal lagoon and potentially solar could be a really good option because you've got that protected environment.
Absolutely. If you look at the Dragon Energy Island, which is Swansea City's proposal for the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon, they've incorporated floating solar in their lagoon. And I know it's something that most lagoon developers have looked at. And we certainly are thinking about it, but rather like Chris says, we need to establish, it's the 80-20. We need to get the concept of the lagoon accepted, the primary function, the primary technology, that primary challenge of an already massive infrastructure project. Then we can look at, for ourselves, adding in floating solar. And again, if we've got waves impacting on the outside of the seawall, that's an obvious add-on. So I've mentioned storage already. So I think these, getting these all to work together has real potential. But as I say, many people focusing on the core business first, and then the extras later on.
Yes, we've got a few hurdles to overcome in those initial core businesses, but we'll get there, I'm sure of it. So a further question I had was around the supply chain. So our various technologies are pulling on elements of the same supply chain. And I think we all touched on the need to capitalize on the opportunity here. But how do we capitalize on this shared supply chain to encourage this question is not very clear. How can we capitalize on this to encourage a solution to go into the different sectors of ocean energy? And how do we sort of bring the supply chain along with us on that? Tim, should I start with you? Because you're obviously sort of the core of a key cluster down in Pembrokeshire. You're on mute, Tim. My turn to call you out.
Thanks. Yeah, so obviously, as a port, we've got supply chain companies who have diversified their businesses into marine renewables. The skills are transferable, as I said during my presentation, and they've done a very good job at it. Delivered consistently for a number of technologies, all shapes and sizes. And the one thing that's it is quite apparent is when you're doing these prototypes, the scale is something else in compared to what compared to kind of traditional shipbuilding. And obviously, as the size increases that's not just for one unit, it's for multiple units as we try and kind of work towards kind of commercialization. You're going to be looking at multiple units trying to be built in effectively a production line, and that's a massive challenge to overcome, because rather than sort of it being a one-off, your exposure as a supply chain company is is going to increase, and you're going to need to have the kind of strength of balance sheet to buy your materials, hit contractual gates, and then obviously get paid from the customer or the client. So yeah, it's a really challenging space, but it's something I think is increasingly understood. And I think one of the ways in which you kind of build that capacity up in the supply chain is through the development of stepping stone projects. Projects like the Morelights is a great example. You're going to basically be bringing multiple units in. Some of the other Erebus is the Blue Gem Wind floating wind project is pitched at 96 megawatts as a kind of a pathfinding project. So was the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon. It was a 300-ish megawatt development. There to kind of build the capacity in the supply chain. So it's a sensible strategy for a number of reasons, but it's got to have that support behind it. On the cost benefit. So it's not going to be the cheapest option, because the cheapest option would be to just go for capacity and let industry kind of commercialize elsewhere and try and just capture the cheap kind of output of those generation stations. But I think what's encouraging is that we are seeing now policy shift towards kind of more value for money. So the supply chain plans, the offshore wind has got the offshore wind sector deal has got a industry target around 60%. I know that the marine energy sector has got kind of those similar aspirations. So we're going to increasingly have to see that bringing the supply chain along with you as a key kind of part of those projects deliverables, I think.
Very much so. I know as Marine Energy Wales, we're actually working with Menter on the Celtic project, which sort of looks at addressing some of that. Sarah, you've got anything to add there in respect to the Celtic project and how that is bringing the supply chain to interface with the sector and look at that opportunity?
Yeah, definitely. So Celtic is working with supply chain businesses across Wales and Ireland. So we've got that Celtic Sea link. Work with what we've got locally. Celtic are doing a really good job of pulling in supply chain businesses that maybe aren't currently in marine energy and could diversify into it, and bringing them to the same table as the developers to have that conversation of the requirements and the capabilities and how they match up, where the gaps are and what we can grow on to grow the industry. I'd say, from a Celtic and a Morelights perspective, in the more short term, we've had some really good conversations with supply chain businesses about collaboration to work with what you've got. We sat them down in front of a developer and realised the sort of scale of size of a workshop that developers are going to need when these turbines are full size, ready to be deployed. And actually spoken to the businesses about how they can use company A's space, but company B build this bit and company C build this bit. So there's more of a collaborative approach on the short term. And then I'd say in the longer term for supply chain and for growing the industry, I think probably go back to the education side. Keep working with schools and colleges to bring in more modules and courses and qualifications, and that's how we're going to capitalise on this in Wales to grow the industry.
Yes, you've touched there on the need for skills and training, and I think that's a key example really of something where you start on a foundational level and then build on that to ensure that you've got the capability and the expertise locally. Okay, let me just scan through the questions we've got here. I think there was one for Tim. So this was hydrogen related, Tim. So is there a chicken and egg situation with hydrogen, and how can this be overcome? So I think this is referencing the need for infrastructure and appliances that support or use hydrogen to warrant the investment in large scale hydrogen production and vice versa. So we've overcome this same challenge with the rollout of fossil fuels and electricity. Are there any comparisons that you would draw?
It's quite interesting listening to the hybrid conversation, because obviously, there's evidence. Henry mentioned it, Chris mentioned it, and I think you mentioned it as well in your presentation, that we are seeing technology developers integrate hydrogen production, storage, or transmission of the output of the generation stations into their plans. And yeah, it does, on paper, it does, seem like it's a kind of a very preferential kind of energy vector. It's been backed quite heavily by government in the 10-point plan, and which is very good, very positive, and there's some really interesting innovation projects not only in Wales but across the UK. I mentioned the Energy Kingdom project, and Morelights has got some funding recently. It was announced at the last budget around doing some hydrogen work up there as well, which is great. And but there are some real challenges. You're effectively kind of having to rewrite the infrastructure almost, and provide or modify the kind of existing gas infrastructure to cater for a new commodity that wasn't necessarily built to accommodate. Quite interesting that hydrogen, when we had Towns gas back in the 50s, 60s, I think it was about 60% hydrogen. So we're sort of kind of going kind of full circle on it. And there is this kind of, when people say hydrogen, you think, the Hindenburg, and everybody kind of gets a little bit excited about it, but it's it's just as flammable as natural gas. But so the challenge with scalability is a big one, and to do that, to answer the question, you really need that kind of strong policy backing. And I think the best comparator, rather than kind of the fossil fuel one, is probably the example around floating wind. So government have said quite openly that they're kind of backing it as part of the offshore wind sector deal. Crown Estate have then responded and said, right, we're going to do not just Crown Estate in England and Wales, but Crown Estate in Scotland, both looking at leasing rounds for floating wind. That starts to switch on the big technology developers and the big site developers with the strength of kind of balance sheet to go and actually see a large scale development from conception through to commissioning, and that builds scale into capacity into the system. So it's that kind of spark that starts the building in capacity. But you can't with hydrogen. It's the only slight differences with hydrogen, is that you need to kind of build the user base as well. So we've got to look at how do we build like heavy use demand into that model, so that those big investments backed by policy have an end user who can benefit from the commodity, and then the whole commercial process works at a rate which is viable for everybody. And that's the point of the Milford Energy Kingdom project, is really to kind of look at all those relationships from a producer's perspective and from a consumer's perspective, to try and kind of understand how do you kind of build that scalability for generating hydrogen and then using hydrogen in the heat, power and the transport markets, which it inevitably is going to support. So we're working through that at the moment, and it's going to be quite, this time next year we'll probably have stuff to present, and then hopefully that'll then go into policy, and we'll start seeing, I think Chris mentioned, contracts for difference around that don't just look at megawatt hours of electric, but meters cubed of a green gas like hydrogen. And hopefully that'll overcome the chicken and the egg.
Thank you, Tim. Anybody else have anything to add? Henry, perhaps?
If I can add something, probably more as a consumer than as any form of expert, but I drove down from the north of Scotland last night, and it was a 490-mile trip down. So, frankly, any electric car is going to struggle with that. And as a consumer, I do feel that government is pushing towards hydrogen. But Germany, to contrast, is funding 100 hydrogen filling stations. In the UK, we currently have 8, I believe, and 7 of those are within the M25. For those of us who live in Shropshire or Wales or anywhere else, they're not exactly helpful. So I think that we are looking at a real challenge in the next decade. If we need to expand our electricity supply hugely as we phase out gas and nuclear and whatever else and coal. At the same time, there are plans to decarbonize heating. There's a lot of talk about air pumps. There's decarbonization of transport. There's a lot of EVs. And so there are some great EVs out there. But for some consumers, I really feel that hydrogen is, hydrogen fuel cells are the way forward. And that I think that the chicken needs to be, I can't get the pun right, but basically I do think the government needs to help and get more filling stations out there. And that's the little bit of the puzzle that needs doing. And if there are 100 hydrogen filling stations across the UK, and then that would suddenly make fuel cell technology far more attractive. It might reduce the load on electricity because there's an alternative to EVs. So we all share the sense of direction and decarbonisation, but I think in terms of chicken and egg, that's one egg that the government could really help with.
Yes, definitely. I think I'd agree with you there. I mean, I've actually got an EV myself, and electric charge points are quite hard to come by sometimes as well. So that whole network alteration and change to the infrastructure that's required to support this. I think, Tim, as part of the Milford Haven Energy Kingdom, you're working with RASA as well, aren't you? Is that right? The hydrogen car?
Yes, yeah. So we've got so the River Simple have got a trial of 2 of their vehicles in and around the Milford Haven Waterway using their RASA concept, and their business plan isn't just selling a car; it's selling transport as a service. So you pay a monthly fee, you get the car, you get the fuel, you get the maintenance, and the peace of mind. So it's going to be quite interesting seeing they're going to be using the data from the various trials. So the port are going to be using the vehicles for a short time. I think the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult will be, Pembrokeshire County Council will be, who, like Henry said, they're the types of users, well, certainly the council, the types of users who use a range in excess on a daily basis, in excess of a reasonable range that an EV would benefit from. And certainly in Pembrokeshire, it's relatively hilly. Your MPG isn't necessarily the best, so you need that ability to get around more than 100 miles, 150, 200 miles a day sometimes. So yeah, exciting times. They'll be in Milford Waterfront as of September, I think.
Yes, I saw the electrolyser arrive fairly recently, didn't it? Which quite an exciting milestone, I imagine, for the project. I think Sarah from the Anglesey Hydrogen Hub, it's being called, the hydrogen interest up there, and that's looking actually at decarbonising transport as well. But is that with bigger lorries and transport, or was it ships? I can't quite remember.
I'm not sure at this stage. Yeah, it would definitely be something exciting to work alongside Morelights. I think there was a car charging point installed in Shetland, so maybe we can build on things like that in Holyhead and put something in for cars as well as trains, buses, who knows what in future.
Indeed, I think it's quite good to draw perhaps a parallel with that they're achieving up in EMEC, so the European Marine Energy Centre, where you've seen again that innovation seed of marine technology actually driving hydrogen, and I think they've got a hydrogen ferry that they're intending to bring in. So the opportunity is enormous, but we're obviously at the very early stages of that learning curve, and I think that is the same across quite a few of the technologies that we've talked about. I'm being nudged that we're coming close to the end of our time. So is there anything that anybody else would like to add, or any remarks around some of the other questions that I haven't brought you in on?
Just, I think I'd like to go back to the supply chain one just quickly and to talk about, there's obviously massive opportunity for existing supply chain, but from a floating offshore wind perspective and from a barrage perspective or a lagoon perspective, this is an opportunity for a new supply chain. The sort of numbers we're talking about will bring new, very large operators to the area. And it's not just about tier 1, it's about tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, making sure that whether it's a reinforced concrete supplier or Dover Steels provide the reinforced concrete, wherever it might be, making sure that we go further down that line. The other thing I'd like to say is that, in the past, we've been manufacturing wind turbine towers in the UK. The anemometer monopile that I put in the sky with the sand in 2001 was manufactured in North Wales. Now, we probably haven't got that capability at this moment in Wales, and these structural members are getting larger and larger, and we want to make sure that we get as much of the opportunity to do something we can, and that's something that we're looking at. But it ultimately needs projects. It needs projects and projects to get on time. We mentioned the Swansea Bay Lagoon with the Sky with the Sands, 2 big projects in Swansea Bay. both of which didn't get through and could offer a great opportunity for local supply chain. So ultimately, it's about making sure that these projects get the consent, get the support they need at the right time to give the opportunity to industry.
That's a really good point, I think, Chris. And I'm going to do a bit of a blatant plug for Marine Energy Wales now. We're actually working on a supply chain work package, which will look at the needs of the industry, taking into consideration some elements of that pipeline. As you say, that pipeline is really crucial for businesses to commit, make that investment, and upskill and uptool to kind of mirror what that pipeline is expecting. So we're working with the sector to understand those requirements. And as you mentioned, the tier 1 to tier 3, how all of those opportunities come through. And then we will go out to supply chain. So we've got quite a vast database that we're working actually with Welsh Government on to understand how businesses within Wales can diversify to support the sector relevant to the sector's needs. And that will hopefully be coming through in the next couple of months. I think one other thing to mention about supply chain and coming into the sector, there's obviously a nervousness potentially that diversification is a hurdle to overcome, and there's challenges associated with going into the marine environment if you've potentially been working in a terrestrial onshore environment previously. And as Marine Energy Wales, we've actually developed the Marine Energy Test Area. So that is designed to support supply chain in testing those components, sub-assembly, so a collection of components all put together, going right through to device deployment. So we're kind of working really well as a sector to bring all of these opportunities together and understand them. And that's some of the purpose of Marine Energy Wales. So just a couple of reminders that there's subsequent sessions to follow today at 12:30 and 3, I believe it is, although someone may need to correct me on that. And we hope to see you on those. And just a big thank you really to all of our panel members. I think it's been a really good session, and hopefully all of the audience has enjoyed us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.